In the history of philosophy, there have been many arguments both in favor and against the existence of a creator. Some of these rest on Judeo-Christian assumptions of an all-good, all-powerful God. Others simply rely on the existence of a conscious entity manifesting the universe into being in some way or another. Most of these arguments are intended to provide a yay or nay to God's existence, provided their premises are correct. Arguments such as the Ontological, dating back to St. Anselm of the 11th century, and the Cosmological, which goes back to Plato and Aristotle, attempt to settle the question based on notions of the need for a greatest or an eternal being. Arguments against God, on the other hand, such as the argument from evil, which applies to an all-good, all-powerful God as in the Bible, try to prove a certain kind of God does not exist, since it is impossible to prove that no kind of God exists. While these philosophical arguments attempt to persuade based on reasonable axioms about the universe, another class of arguments attempt to show that even if you could make a case one way or another, it would call into question the reliability of knowledge itself. The idea is that it is impossible to make an argument, which is a kind of knowledge, if that argument casts doubt on the existence of knowledge itself. A good example of such an argument is the case against our being Boltzmann brains. A Boltzmann brain, introduced by the father of statistical mechanics, Ludwig Boltzmann, proposes that if the universe, and therefore ourselves, is statistically random, that is, if our existence is a fluctuation out of nothingness, then the most likely way that we would exist is as brains implanted with fake knowledge. This knowledge, while appearing to be consistent with the universe because it is fake, tells us nothing about the universe because such a proposal assumes that all knowledge is random and therefore unreliable. That calls into question anything we can say about the universe at all. In other words, it says that knowledge isn't real, but the statement knowledge isn't real is itself a form of knowledge. Any statement that is, for example, either true or false is a form of knowledge. This means that any argument in favor of Boltzmann brains that presumes our knowledge about the universe is random and meaningless damns itself as a philosophy. Such arguments seem reasonable on their face. After all, how can we use logic and premises to show logic and premises don't exist or are unknowable? On the other hand, there are strong arguments against our ability to access reliable knowledge about the universe. These originate with Kant in the 18th century and culminate with the postmodernism today, and it is possible indeed to argue against the existence of absolute knowledge without sabotaging one's own argument. And indeed, it is necessary in some cases. For example, suppose that the universe has formed through purely physical, blind, and inanimate processes. In other words, the universe does not have a conscious, knowledgeable creator. This is the premise of what I'm going to call naturalism, which simply means that the universe arose from natural causes and has no creator. In the absence of a conscious creator, we're forced to assume that our own knowledge is the result of blind processes, and there is no absolute meaning to concepts like true, false, right or wrong. All these are relative. They are products of evolution. That means that all human knowledge, in the absence of a creator, is relative. There is no standard by which truth or moral certainty can be held except by the collective decision of the human species. That does not imply, as in the Boltzmann brain case, that our knowledge is random or fake. Rather, our knowledge has some correlation to reality, but that correlation has no objective standard. Another species on another planet could have its own mathematics and science that bears little resemblance to ours. They would not formulate their knowledge necessarily in the same kinds of statements that we do. Something as simple as 1 + 1 = 2 might have no meaning to them. Maybe Carl Sagan was wrong and mathematics and science are not universal languages. Even if this other species did have similar concepts of numbers and numerical operations that we do, that would simply imply that the same evolutionary pressures that caused us to develop such concepts exist elsewhere in the universe. Yet the absolute standard does not exist. From this, we are forced to conclude that our knowledge is unreliable, including the statement, "Our knowledge is unreliable." Everything we know about the universe is subjective to the species, not objective to the universe. Philosophically, you can absolutely take this path. Some philosophers, such as Daniel Dennett, do, but most atheistic scientists and others who profess naturalism do not. They want to have their cake and eat it too, but what they profess in denying a creator is the epistemological equivalent of anarchy. Nothing they say, no logic they apply, can be considered to be absolute. Rather, it is merely an adaptive strategy in the evolutionary game. Now, that does not mean that if you believe in a creator, you have to accept concepts like absolute truth and morality. Ludwig Wittgenstein, for example, was a devout Christian, yet his philosophy questioned any notion that logical arguments could tell us anything about the universe at all. A creator, after all, has his own knowledge, perhaps that is above all human knowledge and absolute, but that does not mean that reason leads to it. Instead, Wittgenstein argued, reason reminds us of what our beliefs imply. In other words, if I choose to accept certain premises, then I can use reason to ascertain what those premises mean and then determine whether I want to continue to hold those beliefs. Yet, none of that is certain knowledge about the universe. In both the naturalist and in the theistic belief system, there are strong arguments against our ability to have absolute knowledge about the universe. On the naturalist side, absolute knowledge implies a mind, or at least some kind of non-physical register, like a cosmic computer, that can arbitrate what is and is not true for anything the conscious human mind can conceive. Why such a register would exist from natural causes is hard to argue, and certainly we can't find evidence for such a thing. Could such a thing be present in quantum information theory? Perhaps, but we, by premise, assume no consciousness, so its interpretation is up to us. On the theistic side, we accept a mind who is able to interpret information and say what is right and wrong and true and false. But our observation of human evolution, human language development, and our inability to undergird our most precise language system, mathematics, with anything other than it appears to work and explain physical phenomena remarkably well, yet is a house built on the sand of human intuition, suggests that our knowledge is not absolute. It is from this concept that Kurt Gödel developed his famous incompleteness theorem that showed that there are formally true statements in mathematics that cannot be proved, because essentially their proofs are infinite. In fact, mathematics and all knowledge are constructed out of language and are self-referential, meaning that they only refer to other concepts that exist in language itself. When we use those languages to talk about the real world, what we are actually doing is talking about human behavior. Even something like a scientific measurement is a human behavior. I look at a pointer or digital display and read off the number next to it. I can interpret it however I want, but what matters is what I do with the information. So it seems like, as far as human knowledge goes, you are in a catch-22 situation when it comes to the creator. You can either deny the creator and be certain that your knowledge is subjective, which is itself a subjective belief, or you can accept the creator but recognize that human knowledge is based in language which is self-referential. Most people take the third option, which is to embrace epistemological absolutism in the face of evidence to the contrary. We believe in absolute truth because it suits us to do so from an evolutionary and social perspective, regardless of whether that belief is religiously motivated. Given the first two options, is there any good reason to accept the existence of a creator if it does not bring additional certainty to the human condition? Well, most religions are based on faith, not certainty and knowledge, for good reason. Faith assumes not that my knowledge is certain, but that the creator's is. In other words, we can assume that even if my knowledge is unreliable, subjective, and relative, the creator's knowledge is reliable, objective, and absolute. This is the position that modern theistic religions hold. The alternative is the Buddhist or Stoic approach, which is to say that we cannot rely on belief in a creator, and so we should let go of any concept of certainty at all. This is not quite the atheistic approach, but more agnostic. The focus is not on knowledge, but on training the mind to let go so that faulty viewpoints do not cause suffering. The theist has an advantage here, provided they believe in a creator who is based in love. This love is not the faulty, contingent love of human beings, but absolute. Such love is a powerful motivator, not only to feel like there is a meaning and purpose to life, but to change and become a better person. The agnostic atheist answers, however, why believe in an illusion for what are clearly just practical reasons? We don't need to fool ourselves, but the point is that if knowledge is unreliable and subjective, even the belief or non-belief in a creator is likewise unreliable and subjective. We do not know how to know the creator because our knowledge is insufficient to know him, and the same is true for the non-believer. Worse, we don't know ourselves with any reliability either. Just as believers do not know what they believe in, not really, non-believers don't know what they are disbelieving in. They don't even know if they are really disbelieving or only professing disbelief because it is fashionable or relieves their cognitive dissonance given all the evil in the world. One could say the same about the believers. All this is just words. Given the unreliability of self-knowledge, any knowledge we claim to have boils down to how it informs our behavior and what thoughts we give time to in our conscious minds. Since most of our mental processing is unconscious, how we act determines what we believe deep down, not the other way around. This is why you can have so many Christians who do awful things while you can have moral atheists. Those Christians say what they believe with their actions, regardless of what they say with their mouths. That's why Jesus said, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven." I know of two famous Christians who held to some version of this belief, that the belief in and favor of the Creator God is inherent in our actions, not in our words, because our deepest faith exists well below the surface of the conscious mind. This means that what we can articulate about our beliefs is only tangential to what we truly believe, because what we truly believe comes out far more in our unconscious motivations. Our conscious mind, meanwhile, is perfectly happy to invent reasons why we do what we do to give itself the illusion that it is in charge, but that doesn't mean it knows the origins of our actions at all. We are rather creatures who act out our beliefs day by day and always have. Knowledge is not reliable, but rather tied to how humans collectively behave and interact. Philosophically, we can both accept that absolute knowledge exists, but is inaccessible to us, or we can reject knowledge entirely. In both cases, we still have to make choices about how to act and whether to try to change who we are deep down. Any major change we make, any lasting change, is not a change in habit or behavior alone, however, but our deepest beliefs. Thank you so much for joining us today. See you soon again in the next video. Until then, good night and stay curious.